Welcome to the No Limit, No Boundaries UFO podcast. Veteran UFO investigators Dan Spell and Mike Pinicello take on all aspects of the UFO phenomena with insight and honesty. It's all fair game here. No limits, no boundaries. And now, here are your hosts, Dan and Mike.
Welcome, everyone, to our show. Tonight, my co-host, Mike Panicello, and I are going to be talking about black triangles. Black triangles, as you probably all know, have been around for decades or perhaps even longer and are very often seen in the skies. Some people think that they're extraterrestrial in nature. Other people think they might be some type of secret government program. Mike,
hey,
good
how
to see you,
doing?
buddy.
It's good to see you too. It's
Let's
nice.
get started on the black triangles. See
It sounds good.
What we can find out and figure out about them. So we hope that we can answer the questions on the screen in front of you. What are the black triangles? Are they man-made military craft? Are they man-made hybrid airships? Could they be part of some intense post 9/11 surveillance program that the military set up? Could they be holographic illusions generated by our military as some type of psychological test on the public? As many believe, they could also be of extraterrestrial origin. Or maybe they're just they're a hybrid. Somehow we got our hands on a ET craft and back engineered it and made something of our own. Could they be large unmanned drones? That's a possibility too. And then I think the last one on the screen is a form of mass hallucination that people are just either because that they've watched so many shows on television or listened to podcasts talking about them, if they see something they don't understand, maybe they're just automatically jumping to black triangle.
As Fox Mulder would say, they want to believe.
Yes, exactly. So the research I did, Mike, I found a reference to the Italians back in 1933. Benito Mussolini allegedly set up a secret program to study UFOs. And that cabinet was known as Cabinetto RS-33. Apparently there was a flap of flying triangle UFOs sighted all over Italy. And then, 5-8 years before the war broke out.
And I think it's important to note the date too, 1933. And as we go later into our discussion of black triangles and we look at some of the more modern possible causes for this, we should reference back to this 1933 and the level of technology humanity had. And I mean humanity as a whole, because not just Italian, but the United States, Great Britain, France, Russia, well, the Soviet Union at the time, we were all around the same in the way of aeronautical technology, in the way our ability to create planes and other flying objects at the time.
Absolutely true. Now, is this an accurate or true thing? There's no way to prove that because the documentation probably that would prove that or disprove it has been destroyed, I'm sure, or locked away somewhere. But it's interesting to note that Mussolini may have been doing that. And Mike, before we went on the air here, you mentioned that black triangles are just triangular shaped craft goes back a long time. In fact, it does. And I found this this very famous copy of this very famous painting called The Crucifixion. Now, perhaps my mind is stretching it a little bit, but the object in the upper right corner sure has a delta type shape to it, doesn't it?
Mhm. It does.
The one on the left, perhaps not so much, but the one on the right very definitely is triangular or delta shaped.
Hmm. It does. It absolutely does.
And
I
that
could see it.
painting is from 1350 AD, of course.
So then the question is why would they put that in there if they didn't see it? You know, so often, I don't know, when you watch documentaries on TV about cave paintings that they find in various parts of Europe, and even paintings on the walls in Native American settlements in the United States or in Latin America, the anthropologists always say they drew what they saw. They drew what they saw.
Yeah.
But then when you look and say, well, some of these things look extraterrestrial, or like in this case, a triangle, all of a sudden the narrative changes and they say well, it's just their interpretation of what their gods were like. So it doesn't really make sense.
It, you know what, Mike, it doesn't. If you look a little closely at that image there on the screen, the painting,
Mhm.
it looks to me like the two people, the occupants of those two craft are manipulating controls of some type.
It does. You can
Now,
see.
if that's fairly good detail for an artist to have. I mean, what would make him even at that time in 1350 make him think that they would be manipulating controls inside of a craft if he hadn't seen it?
True. That's exactly it. Right.
Just one of those details that makes you wonder.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, it also makes you wonder why they won't tell you the truth about these.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely true. Good question. Now, going back to our slide talking about Mussolini looking for UFOs. This is a German designed aircraft called the Gotha P-60A. Now, not to point out the obvious, but I'm going to, it sure looks like a delta shaped or triangular shaped craft.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I have to wonder if the Germans had these and they were looks like jet powered aircraft.
It does.
On the screen. I believe that those are jets.
It says biofuel rocket engine at the lower one.
A rocket, okay. Could the Italians have been seeing early design versions of this aircraft or others that the German military had been working on?
Well, it would make sense.
They were allies, leading up to the war and during the war. So
yep.
The Germans could have flown those over the skies of Italy with no problem because they were allies.
But wouldn't Mussolini have known that instead of setting up that committee to look into the triangles?
Interesting question. Who knows what Adolf Hitler was thinking at the time, but my gut tells me that Hitler and the Third Reich kind of looked at Mussolini as a less than equal to themselves as a partner in that axis with the Germans, the Italians, and the Japanese. I think they probably looked at him as not as good. Right. So they may not have told him what they were doing. Who knows?
That's true.
It depends on what their attitude was. Because they believed they were superior to everybody else on the planet.
Well, that is definitely true.
I think you could probably throw the Italians in with that. And this next slide is real, just continues that train of thought for a minute. If you look at the
Mhm.
right, very clear delta shape, triangular. It's kind of a crescent shape there.
Mhm.
You know, those are exactly what people are reporting being seen as black triangles.
Well, look
That
at
doesn't mean
the
that's the craft, but those are the shapes. And that goes back into as early as 1931.
right, and bringing it back to Mussolini's committee and tying in what we were just talking about of not telling the Italians. They started in 31, and then their next one was 34, and the committee
Yeah.
was started in 33. So
Mhm.
it definitely makes sense that they were using the airspace. I mean, Europe is a very big continent, but at the same time, when you have high-speed aircraft, it's
Yeah.
a very small continent.
Oh yeah. I mean, you could fly from Germany over the Alps and you're in Italy in no time.
True.
Especially if you have one of these type of aircraft with jets, or the one was rocket propelled.
Yes,
Sure,
but
it would take no time at all. And if he was flying those down over Italy, as testing the Germans, I wonder if
Mhm.
they were doing that to test the Italians to see, and their own aircraft, to see how easy they are to detect and how the air defenses would react to them. But it could have been a type of a proving ground for the German triangular shaped aircraft.
Well, that makes sense. I didn't think of that, but you're right. They would have the same kind of technology in the way of radar that the Allies would have had.
Right.
Same with the,
Conventional, 1930s radar systems. Absolutely.
and then if worse comes to worse, and the Italians try and shoot them down, they can say, wait, no, it's just us, it's your allies. So
Right.
that makes a lot of sense. That let's give it a shot. And I wish there was a way to get access to these records somehow.
There
But
may
you're
well
right.
be.
There's just, well, I don't speak German, and I'm sure they're either
And I
an
don't speak
Italian or a
Italian.
German. So we would need someone to translate it. But any of our listeners that might have a suggestion, send it to us.
Absolutely. We welcome all input from people.
But look how quickly they did. When you look at this, look how quickly they moved through the advancement from 1931 until 1944.
Mm-hmm.
Even they made some very quick advancements in the flying wing design.
They sure did.
And I find that impressive. How they could develop something from a rudimentary test to a much more advanced test. And I think this little chart here
Mm-hmm.
lends a lot of credibility to what we eventually see later on in our conversation and here, and what we talk about, and what people see in the 1950s and early 60s in the US, especially after Project Paperclip, when the government brought in a lot of the CIA, at the time, Office of Special Projects, precursor to the CIA, brought in a lot of these Nazi scientists.
They did. And they weren't, I'm sure they weren't all like Werner von Braun, rocket scientists, but a lot of them were very good aerospace engineers and designers, I'm sure.
Well, I would think that the same thing, how our military works, where you have SAP, Special Access Programs.
Right.
I think just because you were in the Third Reich and you were in the higher echelons of their science divisions, didn't mean you had access to everything.
Right.
For that very reason, what if you got caught or captured or killed? You'd want to compartmentalize stuff. So it would make sense that maybe von Braun didn't know about this, or he did, or about a part of it.
Right. One has to ask themselves, this design scheme that we're looking at here on the screen, did the Germans come up with this themselves? or did they possibly have help with it? And by that, I don't mean the Italians or the Japanese. I'm talking about extraterrestrial help. It's possible, but I don't know that we'll ever know that for sure. But
It
it
also-
sure was ahead of its time.
It was. And it also asked the question of, I think to answer that question, you'd have to figure out which side of the conspiracy line you're at. Because if you're on the more conservative side of the conspiracy line, you'd say, well, maybe, but the technology maybe was suggested by the aliens, and then they helped develop it, and then kind of the Germans ran with it. Because when you're looking at the descriptions of all of these objects, they're all conventional craft. Like as we talked in our last podcast, the so-called breakaway civilization that came from the Germans had anti-grav. So if it was truly extraterrestrial saying you should build a delta wing aircraft, why use a rocket when you could say power it with anti-grav?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And then that's
Absolutely.
where the other side of the conspiracy line would be, the Germans at this point already broke, and you had that breakaway civilization that was moving themselves to Antarctica and they're going on their own divergent course with the aliens. And this is more of the German government that was not involved with the extraterrestrials, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you believe that they actually did have contact with the extraterrestrials.
Okay. Some characteristics here, Mike, of them that people have reported that they can hover. The edges are rounded and not squared off. There's typically illumination at the three tips of the triangle and in the middle. Of different colors have been reported, right?
Mm-hmm.
White and perhaps even red in the middle. The biggest one would be red. And some people have reported brilliant, almost blinding white flashes when they've seen these, particularly when they accelerate. A type of a bright flash is shown and then they just vanish. Accelerate away very quickly. The accelerations I just mentioned about, large, of course, typically silent and often black or a dark gunmetal color. But some have reportedly emitted a humming sound,
Mm-hmm.
a very faint or low humming sound. And as we noted, this last one, of course, if you take that painting about the crucifixion, this sightings could go back centuries before the 1800s. But I think though the modern era of UFO reporting is generally what people think of, and that probably goes back to the 70s when these were really starting to be seen across the US and around the world, at least as reported. Anything else you can think of to describe what people were seeing, or does that pretty much cover it?
This is basically all what I've ever read about triangles are the top characteristics of what people see. And what I always find interesting about this and is that they're always consistent. Like when you look at online and you look for descriptions of what witnesses see of these black triangles, they're always the same. So that to me means that there is something there.
Right.
I know we'll get into mass hallucinations, but if it is a mass hallucination, then whoever is perpetrating that is doing a really good job, because everyone from all walks of life, and when you read the witness reports on various UFO sites on the internet, whether their background is in sciences or they just have a high school education, or they're a clerk in a store, to, you know, a lawyer, they all see similar characteristics. So to me, that means there's something there. What it is, I don't know. But I'm curious, have you ever seen a black triangle?
I have not. How about yourself? Have you?
Yeah, I have not. I did think I saw one twice. I thought I had two encounters, and I was driving home from visiting a friend both times. And where I live is over a flight path for our international airport that's in my state. And I saw a long triangle, a long thin line with three white lights and a little blinking white one, a little blinking red one. And it was coming at me. So it wasn't a triangle shape yet. And I was so excited. I'm like, I saw a triangle. I saw a triangle. But then when I do a little more research, I realized they were just airplanes on low approach into the international airport. I was looking at their landing lights, and that was a real disappointment. I gotta be honest with you.
That's very easy to do, to mistake conventional aircraft lights for something else. Yeah, you're not alone there. A lot of people have. Okay. Some statistics for everyone. NUFORC, the National UFO Reporting Center, reports that they have had 12,468 triangles reported to them. And this goes back to the beginning of when NUFORC started gathering data, and 24 delta-shaped objects. Now, what's the difference between a delta shape and a triangle? I guess the back of the delta shape could be concave or even scalloped a bit on the back. It doesn't have to be a perfect equilateral triangle. Does that seem about right?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
The difference between just a delta shaped object and a true triangular shaped one.
I always think if you were going to look at that, you could look at the Mirage, the French fighter jet, or like what the B-2 stealth bomber looks like, or even the F-117. That's a triangle shaped craft to an extent.
MUFON statistics from 1987 till the present time. Numbers aren't quite that different, but MUFON reports 9,651 triangular shaped objects have been reported. And a slight difference between MUFON and NUFORC is that MUFON is reporting 2,226 boomerang shaped craft. Now, a boomerang, I guess, is definitely not an equilateral triangle shape, but it's kind of like, there's one here on this screen, Mike, like these thin ones with the long wingspan on them could be considered boomerang. What do you think? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would go with that. Shape. Sometimes they're a little rounder, more like a traditional boomerang that you would see the Aborigines use in Australia. But that's either of those two shapes are the most common that I know of.
Right.
Now, is it because NUFORC doesn't? What was the NUFORC one again? The delta shape. Do they not have the option for a boomerang shape?
I'm not sure what their
I just thought of this now, or I would have done the research myself before. I don't mean to put you on the spot. It just kind of popped into my head. It's just.
I thought it would be worthwhile for us to talk about some of the most famous sightings that have been reported that involve triangles. One of the most famous ones, of course, is the Hudson Valley UFO flap. Mike,
around my
that's up there,
stomping
not
ground.
far from you,
Yeah,
right?
in fact,
Just
we
west
have a
of where
lot
you
of
are.
well, we still have UFO sightings in Connecticut of triangles along the Connecticut UFO border.
Sure.
So I
Yeah,
guess
this one's very famous. People even claimed it was an invasion. I don't know if I'd go that far, but one of the interesting parts of this is the proximity to Stewart Air Force Base. And reportedly, these objects have a keen interest in what's going on around our military facilities, and especially any that involve nuclear issues, weaponry or fuel. And seem like they're always at night. Does that seem to be holding true for across the board? They don't fly in the daytime. I can't think of.
I do not have any, to my knowledge, any UFO triangles that have happened during the day. They're always, all of the cases I've ever read have been at night.
Why do you suppose that is, Mike? Why wouldn't they fly in the day? There's got to be a reason for it. Other UFOs fly in the day.
Well, if they're black, people that see them up close do say that they're black. I mean, you could say, well, it's dark out, you can't really see the color of the craft, but there's a lot of cases, and you can find these on the internet. Even Newfork has them of close encounters of these craft. So it would make sense that you would fly them at night because it blend in more. But then you could have. Yeah, it could be something to blend in. If it was a stealth craft that's used for surveillance, at night would be the most likely time to operate them. Maybe they're just night owls. Maybe the aliens are more nocturnal creatures. I'm not being silly, but if humans are, we always make the assumptions that aliens are so much like humans that we're day creatures. I mean, it's yes, in our society today we have third shift, second shift, and we're almost a 24/7 society,
right?
But that's a relatively modern thing. That's a more modern trend. In the past, at night people would go to bed and they'd wake up and they'll have a full day. It's not unusual to assume that maybe if this is an extraterrestrial craft, they might have a different sleep cycle. Maybe their day is our day is their night, and vice versa. It's not, this is a different society, a different culture, a different civilization. There's no reason to say that they had to develop a same sleep patterns and time of operation that we do. So that could be why.
Again, as often is the case, the ones up in the Hudson Valley had a keen interest in the Indian Point nuclear power plant. Some people speculated it would, whatever these are, was gathering information on the reactor. And there's a picture of the Indian Point nuclear power plant. And that is the Hudson River right there, correct? Runs right along it.
Yep. And we have West Point, that's up in Hudson, New York.
West Point is up there. What else?
Now, I believe isn't it up in Rome, New York? There was a very large research and development section.
Yeah, Rome Lab is still there, as far as I know. So that's way over west of there, I think.
But it's not unusual to think that, so that area of the state has a lot of strategic interest for a civilization that is monitoring us. It is part of our war fighting capacity.
Yeah, it is, very definitely. But they also, in addition to their interest in the power plant, they often are seen near bodies of water. It's like they're they're evaluating it. What is that bullet there states? They're scanning it
Mhm.
for some reason. I don't know. Can only speculate what it is they're doing, looking for pollution, looking for life in the water. Who knows?
Yeah, I think we have to revisit that, because in the past, past a few years ago, I think we would say water is scarce in the universe, because that was the prevailing feature at the time. Even astronomers thought that,
Right.
and that there's not many Earth-like planets that could host or have liquid water. And now, only in the last few years, our science and our telescopes have advanced enough that we can say, well, there is a lot of water in the universe. There's a lot of water in our solar system. There's a lot of water at Mars and the moon and whatnot. So that, yeah, I would say in the past, I think I would have said, well, maybe they're interested in our water to make sure we don't destroy a precious resource. And now I would say that's probably not the case. So I don't know why they do. Maybe they take the water and use it for hydrogen. Maybe
Yeah.
they split it and use the hydrogen out of it. I don't know.
Right. And maybe however they power these craft, they do need to be cooled. Somehow.
That would make sense.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a good question for next month when we talk about USOs.
Yep. It's a great idea. The second one, another very famous sighting that involved giant triangular or even boomerang shaped craft. The Phoenix Lights of March of 1997. Now imagine you're standing there in Phoenix, valley there, and
Mhm.
just happen to be looking around, looking up, and here comes a giant craft, reportedly 6,000 feet across, the size of 17 football fields or 25 airliners. Now, that, of course, we all know the military tried to say it was all the Air Force or Air National Guard dropping flares from aircraft as part of a training mission. But I
Mhm.
think most people have discarded that excuse that the Air Force shouted at. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think from the way I understood it, they proved without any kind of doubt that there's just no way what the flares look like in the sky matched what they saw.
So I have to ask this question, buddy.
Yeah.
Possible that some of these triangular shaped craft that are being seen have been built by the US military? Entirely possible. But do you think it's remotely possible for the American military or our allies or the Russians or the Chinese to build something 6,000 feet across and to fly silently up, like that? I don't see it. I don't see our technology being that good yet. I could be wrong.
Well, where would you store it? 6,000 feet is a huge.
That's over a mile, right?
Yeah. So that would be my question. Okay, let's say we did build it. Let's say the United States government built it. Yes, the United States is very big and there's a lot of open land out there. But where would you literally put this craft? Even if you were to say they'll start at Area 51, the Groom Lake, it's a huge area.
Right.
Okay. Everyone and their grandmother is watching Area 51 now. I mean, there's spotters all over the place. If you haven't been to that, it's a great place to visit, but there's always tourists around that base. How do you hide something like that? How do you keep something that big on the ground and nobody will see it? I don't understand. That would be my question. So maybe we could build it, but I don't know how we could hide it.
I'd like to know, and I'll get to your question about where to store it. How do what do we have that could possibly power something that big? And these were reportedly silent too. There was no engine roars like you would have from jets or turbo prop engines.
Mm-hmm.
So back to your question about where someone would put it. Yeah, if it's extraterrestrial and they didn't want us to see it, the ocean is a great place to hide one of these.
Mm-hmm.
There are, as you well know, there are reports of USOs, vehicles that are multi-medium. They can fly directly from the air into the water. That's possible. The ocean's huge, and 6,000 feet in the Pacific is nothing.
Sure.
That's a possibility. I don't know that it is. I can't prove it, of course, but and how do you discount this event, Mike? If that estimated number of witnesses is accurate, how do the authorities discount that? How do you say, oh no, you're mistaken? 30,000 people can't all be,
Well, I guess this is where the mass hallucination will come in. Is everyone's seeing something that's fake or a hologram or something. But what was interesting, and when I looked into the Phoenix Lights for this particular podcast that we were doing later on actually a couple of days ago, the official quote unquote sources, there are none. Everything I found is from like either one UFO researcher who is a doctor, or they're from other UFO researchers that have kind of piggybacked on either her research or done some of their own. But there is nothing outside of that, and there's no documents, there's no reports. I went on to one of the UFO websites that's known for looking at FOIA requests and pulling FOIA requests and then putting those online. And that website had like very, very few official documents from the government on that. And there's like no paper trail on this. It's, for all intents and purposes, it kind of it happened, and then they being whoever's in charge just dropped it, and it never developed into anything. And even the news reports, like there's a few news things that you can find on the Phoenix Lights on like YouTube that were recorded on VHS cassettes, but it was only from the period around the actual time of the UFO event, and then a few years later on the anniversary of the event, and then that's it. It seems like there's a very large effort to try and have that kind of just die out.
Yeah.
And so there was 30,000 people, but they told their story once, and that was it. And then society just kind of forgot about them.
Right. It sure seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I guess the question I had when I read this is why? Something really must have happened that they don't want to be discussed, and that's why they're trying to brush it aside.
And don't forget too, the American public's attention span is not very good.
Well, that's true.
We quickly move on to other news of the day.
Yes.
The latest scandal, what's that type of thing.
What's the newest social media app that's going to entertain us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Illinois has its own set of
and this one was new for me. I never really knew much about this until you brought it
back
up.
to early part of this century, the new century, in 2000. Once again, objects were seen near an American military base, Scott Air Force Base, specifically home to the U.S. Mobility Command, and that the AMC is responsible for moving materiel and personnel around the globe in our military. And then goes up to 2004 with the Tinley Park lights.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong,
Go
but
ahead.
Stewart Air Force Base was also, well, it's an Air National Guard base now, but at the time, and even I think to an extent now, they were involved or are involved with Air Mobility Command as well, correct?
Uh-huh.
So that's interesting. So if you think about that, there's a connection. You have two military bases, both involved with Air Mobility Command. And if you keep that in the back of your mind, as we get further down in the PowerPoints and we're talking about the man-made things, we should revisit this.
Okay, we can do that. And there's a map of Illinois just to illustrate where in Illinois the UFOs were centered, and that's down in the southwest corner of Illinois near Scott. And the next triangular shaped case, UFO case, is the one in the UK at Rendlesham Forest, December of 1980. Late one night, an object was seen just outside the gate of that joint base in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And the story is that U.S. airmen went out there to investigate. They left the gate and walked out unarmed, by the way. They were not allowed to carry their weapons off of the base proper. So they went out there with flashlights, unarmed, to investigate. And a couple of the guys there said that when they got close, they came upon a triangular shaped craft with a bunch of what they described as hieroglyphic looking or Egyptian illustrations on it.
Mm-hmm.
Many people have compared this, calling it the UK's Roswell incident, or Britain's Roswell.
Mm. And when you look at the story that they used to justify, it's as crazy as what some of the things that came out to justify Roswell. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who tried to debunk this. They said, "Well, it was the light from the nearby lighthouse,
Right,
which is due east of Rendlesham Forest."
mm-hmm.
But I spoke with Colonel Charles Halt yesterday. He was the deputy base commander at that air base in the UK.
Yeah.
And he was directly involved in this case. And we talked about that lighthouse theory, and he said, no, it's absolutely not possible at all, because he has gone and spoken with the two lighthouse keepers. And the way he described it was, there are three different lights in a lighthouse light that goes around. There's a clear one, a red one, and another color that is escaping me. But what people reported seeing, that color light would not have been visible from that lighthouse. But it's just the way the lens works when it spins around at the top of the lighthouse. The lighthouse keepers both told Colonel Halt, no, they did not see the light from this lighthouse.
So I think sometimes the conspiracy to cover it up, is just as telling as the event itself.
It could be a legitimate effort to cover it up for security reasons, we'll say, right? Mm-hmm. Or there are people out there, I think, Mike, who just make it their mission in life to debunk every UFO sighting that they ever come across, almost like a hobby,
Yeah. And you have to ask yourself why. There's a difference between debunking it and being objective about it. And,
exactly.
And I don't know why people find it pleasurable. Does it make them feel better? I don't know. But
I think they're bored and they're looking for something to do. Yeah, let's make these UFO investigators and witnesses look like fools.
maybe, or
It's
maybe
like,
they're just afraid of the truth. I don't know.
that could be too, buddy. Okay. And on the screen in front of you is a sketch that was made by one of the people involved in it. It's kind of an odd shaped thing, especially with that that thing on the top of it is weird. It just seems like it sticks up way too far, you know?
It does.
It doesn't look sleek or aerodynamic. But
If it was
that's what he says he saw.
well, you know, if you look at the Global Hawk or the Predator drone or the Reaper drone, and you look in the front of that drone,
Yeah,
they have this big bulge in front of it,
right.
and that houses the communications antenna and maybe some of their radars or whatnot.
The navigation, the avionics, all of that. Yeah.
Right. So maybe this, at the time when I was younger, I would have said, well, maybe this is where like a pilot's head would have been. Maybe there's some kind of weird cockpit. I mean, anti-grav, as we talked about last podcast, you don't need to really be aerodynamic. It is what it is.
Any shape.
Yeah. So maybe this is where the alien or the pilot's head was sitting. But now thinking of our own level of technology, or if it was a scout ship, maybe that's where the avionics were. Maybe it makes sense to put it a little higher so that it doesn't have the interference of the engines interfering with the avionics or the upload or download link.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Now, Colonel Halt did say that he went out there with a local resident who happened. He was a plasterer. He repaired ceilings and walls in a plastic. And Colonel Halt had him go out there and take plaster, the liquid plaster, and pour it into 3 areas that he believes were the pods of the legs, the feet of the leg that set down on the ground when the craft landed. So in fact, he still has one of those plaster imprints of the landing feet.
What happened to the other 2?
He didn't say. He just he has one of the 3 that were made. And he said that the craft diameter is about 7 feet on each side, 7 to 9 roughly. So it's not very big. It's actually tiny when you think about it.
Yeah, our craft are bigger than that, our drones.
And
although they're getting smaller.
But in addition to this triangular shaped craft, there were other objects involved in it. It wasn't just a triangular thing. There were spheres, different colored spheres flying around that were picked up on radar. They were roughly the size of a basketball, the colonel said.
Yeah.
And radar tracked at least one of these. It went, according to the radar operator, the object traveled 60 miles in about 2 seconds.
Wow.
Which I think works out to about 3,000 miles per hour. So that's pretty incredible, isn't it?
It is. And that's faster than our current level of technology.
Yes.
At the time, I mean.
At the time. Well, the SR-71 would do it, but
you can't
confuse
no that with. And remember the size of the engines on the SR-71?
Oh, yeah, mammoth.
Things are mammoth. You're talking about a sphere or a 7-foot long craft. So it's, yeah.
And I don't think that our pilots would ever fly the SR-71 at full speed at that low altitude. I just don't think they would do it.
Well, you'll definitely hear it and you'll feel it. The shockwave alone.
Definitely would.
Yeah. So I don't see how anyone could get that confused.
Right.
So again, bottom line is the technology of Rendlesham doesn't make sense for the time that this happened in 1980.
Right.
We were not at that point yet in technology, to our knowledge.
In front of us here, buddy, is a model that someone had made and placed it there as an exhibit in Rendlesham Forest. You see what I was talking about earlier, that dome sitting on top of it. It looks kind of can't even describe it. It just looks different than what most black triangles I have seen images of look like.
Right.
It's like
No,
a
it does.
giant bulbous thing sticking out the top of it. It's
Plus
just
it's-
an observation of design, that's all.
No, but even on the side, like what are those, like markings on the side?
Right
of
here on the side, there are four they look like hand images with what people describe as hieroglyphics on each one of those.
And that
People have
doesn't,
said that they match what have been seen in Egypt.
okay.
Either in or near the pyramids there.
And just as a fun fact, in the Roswell crash, if you remember, in the wreckage, people have reported, the witnesses, that they saw hieroglyphics on those
Right.
objects
Right.
as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Also over in Europe, the Belgian Black Triangle flap. This one was also seen by a whole lot of people in Belgium, by law enforcement, by military people, and by everyday citizens. Again, the very common descriptors: triangular shape with a bright red center, or some type of a flying platform with three huge searchlights.
Yeah. And look at how quickly they dropped. Now,
yeah,
the G forces alone, going from 10,000 feet to 5,000 feet, that pilot would be flat against the ceiling of the craft.
yeah.
And I don't know, that's a pretty steep drop.
Yeah, when we're done, I may try to calculate the speed at which that thing reportedly dived. That's pretty incredible. Good news is none of them were overtly hostile, at least, just cruising around. Look at that acceleration too.
Yeah. Again, even if it was a drone in this time, we would need some big engines to do something like that.
Yeah, this was way before the drone thing came out, I believe. Again, look at the explanations that debunkers have trotted out. Mass hallucination, balloons. I don't think a balloon's going to do that type of acceleration.
I don't think a star or a planet is either. So I don't quite know how they can justify that.
Right. And there's a map of Belgium, and all of those black circles or dots represent where they were seen. That's a whole lot of activity. I mean,
it is. You can kind of ask yourself, why Belgium?
The only thing I can think of is NATO. They had a keen interest in what NATO can do. Maybe they were testing to see how we reacted to the craft. That's a possibility.
That makes sense. Again, but that would also tie back into the military connection, where they want to see what the military response is.
But I've read, Mike, that where the government in Belgium, and perhaps even senior officials at NATO, went right to the U.S. government and said, "Hey, are you guys over here testing any secret or stealth aircraft?" And the reply was, "No, we are not."
But I wouldn't believe always what's being said. I think we keep some things back from our allies.
It's possible, but would would the US government jeopardize its relationship with NATO and possibly put the safety of people at risk by flying experimental aircraft over populated areas like that?
Well,
It's
one
possible that we,
hypothesis I heard is that, the triangles that were in Hudson Valley were US made surveillance craft. And the reason they lit them up like Christmas trees was for the ability to have aircraft see them, because they were a navigational hazard. So,
entirely possible, buddy. I just don't know.
I don't know. I think sometimes there's a lot more politics behind answers than we're given. So
Right.
Logically, I would say you're absolutely right. They wouldn't risk the alliance over that, but in a closed door session, who knows what the reason could be.
Yeah. Unless you're in one of those key positions,
Mhm.
we're not going to know for sure what exactly was going on there. And here is an image. I'm not sure now about the authenticity of this image, but I put it on here to illustrate what people say that they were seeing over there. Some people have said that this image was hoax, but I'm not sure. But that's what it looks like.
Even if it's a hoax, it's a good representation of the characteristics that most
Absolutely
people
is, yes.
see with these triangles.
Yes, sir. Absolutely is. That's typically it. Even here in Maryland, I've had people report triangular shaped aircraft, and that's what they say. They
Mhm.
basically that right there.
Yeah, it's common in Connecticut as well.
Here's one I just found. This is an image of a triangular shaped craft that was spotted over Russia in the 1970s. Now, when I look at that, what it reminds me of is a video that came out recently of objects shaped just like that flying over top of some of our naval ships. They're kind of greeny. Remember those? People describe
Yep.
them as pyramid shaped.
Yes.
Not triangle, but that's exactly the shape. Think about that, 1970s. Wow, that's almost a half a century ago. And these were spotted over Russia too. Unfortunately, we don't get much out of Russia. They just don't openly share what they're seeing over it. I wish they would. And same thing with China. It'd be great to have that information, wouldn't it?
It would. And yeah, I would hope that someday they would, but I think it's because they want the technology.
Oh, absolutely.
If there is, but
I think, yep.
No, go ahead.
No, I agree with you completely. They're very secretive cultures, the governments anyway. They're far less open than our own government, which has its own problems, but I'm sure, and this is just the one that I was able to find, there are other images that could come out of Russia showing the triangles.
I have never seen this before, but if this is if that was a real photo, it's impressive.
Yeah.
Now, they did not rule out the fact that, this was in the 1970s and it's not some kind of weather balloon, high altitude balloon that was weirdly shaped only. I'm not trying to debunk. I'm just saying, like,
right.
Well, I'm just questioning it, like, launched to get readings of the high altitudes for nuclear testing, the upper atmosphere, because before we had the snooper planes looking to sniff the sky, we were using balloons to do the same thing. So
sure.
I wonder, that's the only thing I bring up on it, but you're right, it does look like that video of the triangle craft.
If we were to tint that image green, it would be almost identical to it. Okay.
Yep.
Operation Mainbrace.
Mm.
That was a giant NATO naval exercise up in the far North Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
And this Danish destroyer, the crew reported that they saw a triangular shaped object that glowed a bluish color and moved at a high speed, estimated 900 miles per hour. Now, back then, 1952, did we have any aircraft that could fly 900 miles an hour in 52?
No, because they were working on the U-2 at the time, and I think they only
Yeah.
went a few hundred miles an hour.
Yeah, I don't think we had reached that speed capability yet.
Not yet. The next thing I know of was the SR-71, which was
Yeah,
because the U-2 went so slow, it became vulnerable.
right. That's exactly why the CIA came up with the 71. It's like a bullet flying through the air. That's how quick it flew. And then the National Institute of Discovery Science, NIDS. That was a company set up, or a group set up by Robert Bigelow,
Mm-hmm.
self-made millionaire or billionaire who has for a long time had a keen interest in this topic. He, as you and our listeners probably know, Robert Bigelow used to own the Skinwalker Ranch. And NIDS was put together to, in part, investigate the Skinwalker Ranch and also took a look at the Black Triangle phenomenon. And here's what's interesting about it. They looked at 150 cases. The dimensions, and here's the key part, is in red. Dimensions and the behaviors were similar to lighter than air blimps.
Mm-hmm.
So look at the dimensions, 600 feet long, 300 feet wide, and weighing about 100 tons used to transport payload. So I guess, and I think I'm interpreting this accurately, is that NIDS thinks some of these may be, man-made hot air airships.
And you notice how big they are? Like the longest they say is 600 feet. And you go back to the Phoenix Lights, they're talking 6,000 feet.
Significantly bigger than that, yes. Yep. And here's interesting facts too. The sightings of the triangles are almost always near population centers and along interstate highways. I don't know what the significance of that is, other than whoever is flying them isn't afraid to do so around populated areas.
Yeah. Which again, like you were saying, if it was our technology, like the US government, it's risky to not tell anyone you're there with major aircraft corridors and helicopters, private commercial, private planes, commercial planes,
Right.
all which could become navigational hazards.
Sure.
If they ran into from these objects. So if they were testing it, it seems risky for them to do that over these busy populated clusters.
Right. Okay. And since we talked about airships, there's next few slides illustrate what is being worked on. This one's the LMH-1, LM standing for Lockheed Martin, of course, an airship. Look at the shape. Now, look at the back of it. It depending on your angle of seeing it, if it were passing overhead, you might mistake that for something else. You might. Of course, it's not black. It's white.
You also would notice that if this is Lockheed Martin for mobility command, going back to what I said earlier, where those sightings that were of the triangles were at bases that focused on air mobility command, that was a spot for them.
Yeah.
Coincidence, maybe, but
maybe, who knows?
It does seem a little, I don't always believe in
But take
coincidences.
a look at the fins, Mike.
Yep.
See what is on that fin on the top left of the
The
craft?
skunk. Yeah, the skunk.
Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. It
Yep.
gave us the SR-71 and others.
Yep.
But pretty interesting that the Skunk Works would be fooling around with basically blimps, but they must have a good reason for it.
You want to move a lot of cargo fast and cheap and efficiently.
Yeah.
They're not a bad way to go.
Yeah. There's another version. This is the U.S. Army's long endurance multi-intelligence vehicle, the LEM-V, 302 feet long. Again, depending on what you're how you're looking at the object if it's passing overhead, could you mistake that for a triangular shaped object?
Mm-hmm.
It just depends, I guess, on where you are, the time, the lighting and all of that.
They could always modify the shape.
Absolutely.
Too. I mean, they could play with different shapes.
Absolutely correct. There's another version of it.
That almost looks like a triangle.
It sure does. And that's why I was mentioning the angle at which the viewer sees it. I mean, that depending on how far away you are, how good your eyes are, you could almost see a saucer shape on that if you were at a farther distance than there. It would, because of the profile of it, you could mistake that for something else.
Yeah,
a triangular shaped craft, or even a saucer of some type at a distance. There's another version of a Lockheed Martin airship, the P-791.
And do you notice something else interesting about all of these ones that you show? Look at the way that the engines, the way that it's moving, they're fans.
Yes.
Like, for example, here. And remember what a lot of people say they hear when they see a triangle, a low hum.
Exactly.
And if you ever had a fan in your house, you hear a hum when your fan is on.
Is it possible that people are hearing these engines? I suppose it could be, yeah.
Well, I don't know about where you are, but I live in the boonies. So on a clear night in the summer when it's quiet, I can hear my neighbors from blocks away laughing or joking or talking.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I mean, sound does travel. And
sure does.
So it is very possible that depending on the way the wind is, depending on where they are, depending on the sound level of the actual fans themselves, I believe you might be able to hear them.
Sure. Again, look at the tail, the vertical stabilizer in the back. There's the skunk.
Yep.
Telling us it's from the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. And going back briefly to the NIDS triangle study. And this is from the NIDS database. Look at the clustering of the sightings.
Mm-hmm.
And they're pretty much where you would expect them to be. Washington State, which is a hotbed of UFO sightings. Up and down the California coast area, tons of them, just like we get in our reporting, MUFON, that is.
Mm-hmm.
And look at the cluster right in Illinois. That's pretty amazing. I wonder.
Well, look at where White-Patterson Air Force Base is. I mean, it's a little further over, but
but it's still in the general vicinity within the continental U.S.
Yep. And we know Wright-Patterson is a very active research and development, but look at New York.
Yeah, same. Look, a big cluster right there over top of New York, and up, actually up the whole way up from, I guess from DC the whole way up to Boston,
Yeah,
and points in between. That's a lot of triangles, Mike.
it is a lot of triangles.
Now, is the U.S. really testing that many airships? Since we're on that.
Now, are they sure that these are all legitimate sightings and these are just
No,
not
they don't know what they're just
misidentifications?
triangles. They don't know. They weren't able to definitively say, no, these are U.S. built things. But if they are the U.S. or if they are U.S. made craft, are we really creating that many?
Well, I guess go ahead.
Well, that was it. I was just making a point, I guess. That's a whole lot of money being spent on either hot air, lighter than air balloons to transport material, or even if they weren't the airships, if they were truly to say that these are U.S. man-made black triangles, not airships, but metal, nut and bolt metal ships. That's a lot. That is a lot of sightings.
And these are truly unknown though? Like they're not like misidentification of an aircraft
yeah, some portion of them may well be. Yep. But that's a lot. That's a lot of sightings.
It is.
And this one comes right out of MUFON's triangle database. And you can see, with credit to Don Weatherby, who put that together.
Yeah.
You'll see the same clustering, don't you?
Yep. Yeah, same pattern, same cluster. Center of the country by Illinois.
Yep.
Boston, New England, California.
Cluster down in Florida. Of course, there are military bases in Florida over by Tampa.
Oh, sure.
We have
Sarasota.
CENTCOM, Central Command is headquartered there.
Yep. Get Tallahassee over there.
So I guess we wanted to put these up here so that our viewers and listeners can see the extent of the reporting of these objects. Pretty significant. Of course, there's some up in Canada too.
Hmm.
And then carrying this further on a possible explanation for the black triangles, a company called JP Aerospace, they have a project called ATO, Airship to Orbit. And they believe that rather than launching craft into space from the ground, the way that we're doing it now, they would lift up the craft that we want to put into space, take it to some high altitude before the limit of our atmosphere, and then launch them from there. They believe that it's a lot more efficient and cheaper to do it that way. Again, note the shape on the screen.
Yep. The question is, why pick that shape?
Yeah, because it's a balloon. It's an airship. It's not going to fly 500-600 miles per hour. It's going to go up, I assume, pretty slowly.
Right.
So it could be any shape. But here's a couple more looks at it. Called the Ascenders. Now, if I'm sitting on the ground, one night and one of these slowly comes drifting overhead, my God, I just saw a UFO. When in fact, maybe looking at one of these airships, a V-shaped air balloon.
If it's at night and it's late and it's high, it could look like a delta shape. If
absolutely can.
the way they put the illumination on your angle, it could look like a boomerang.
Sure. Back to your question about why this shape, I don't know, but I'm not an engineer,
Yeah, neither
and
am
I'm
I.
sure there are very good reasons for it. I just don't know what they are.
Well, maybe one of our viewers will write in and tell us.
Yeah, we absolutely, folks. If you want to educate Mike and I, please do so. We welcome your feedback, and please do that. Let us know what you think. And there's just comes right off of JP Aerospace's page that says that they have flown over 100 missions with these craft that they make. That's a lot.
It is, and you know some of those have been seen by
but
people.
I've never even heard of this type of a program.
I have not either. Nope. And I like to think of myself as pretty up to date with what's going on in the aerospace industry. I enjoy aerospace, but I have never heard of this. But you could see over 100 cases, at least a handful of those would be witnessed by someone that's like, "Oh my, I saw a UFO."
Oh, you can take that to the bank. Of course, people will, because they don't know any more than I would have before. You know, if I'm looking at and I look up and I see that, does it look like an airplane with wings? That's got to be a UFO, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, the
and then
famous.
Moving on from the airships, a lot of people are believe or stating that they think that the black triangles are this legendary craft called the TR-3. There may even be a TR-3B now.
Mm-hmm.
That, as far as I know, Mike, and maybe you know something different, this is purely speculative. No one knows if one of these has ever been built. I'm sure there was probably research done, to do it. And I think even like models have been built of these. You can buy and put together like a model airplane.
And I've even heard some things along the line that the TR-3A is more of a transport craft for the secret space program to bring personnel from the ground to the spaceships in orbit. So I've even heard that's not even a surveillance craft; it's more like a shuttlecraft. So again, the mystery of this has
entirely
ballooned.
Possible, but it hasn't been proved to be even in existence yet.
Correct. So to my knowledge, no.
Yeah. Some more possibilities for what people are seeing in the sky. Next generation drones built by, as you can see, the usual companies that make these craft for the American government. Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and General Atomics. Now, the one on the far right isn't so triangular in shape. Or Delta, but the X-47B, the Sea Ghost, and the Phantom Ray very definitely fit that model of a triangular or Delta-shaped craft.
Yes.
I don't know. I suppose what we're experiencing, what people are seeing is a combination of things. Possibly some of these drones being tested. Could be some of the airships being flown. Could be something else altogether.
And even going back to the late 40s, early 50s, when we started bringing the scientists over from Germany, the Horton brothers concepts, I mean, that was the foundation for the B-2. Yeah. They used that to develop the B-2. So it's very possible a lot of those earlier triangle sightings was our military, our defense contractors trying to figure out how to adapt to what the Russians did in the 30s and 40s to advance it.
Right.
So It murkies it. The water is murky and the water is muddied.
Yes, it is very definitely. So we include these next few slides. These are from the United States Patent Office for craft. You look at this closely and who it was, the company involved in it is Teledyne Industries, Inc. out in San Diego. And Teledyne, of course, is the T in TR3A and B.
Mhm.
TR is Teledyne Ryan. And that's who people believe has put these together. And it says it right there, Teledyne Ryan Aeronautical. And this was from 1975. So is it possible that the military built some prototypes of these and were testing them out? Perhaps at Area 51, who knows? Entirely possible.
Very possible. And that's only the patents that are declassified. Remember, there's the patent office. There's a
absolutely,
whole
yeah.
set of patents that
Yes,
are classified, and we'll never see them.
correct. Okay.
Yep.
And this is, I believe, the very same craft. It just has a little bit more data for you when the patent was filed and the application granted. But if you look at the profile of it, it still has a cockpit like a jet.
Mhm.
You know, not with a human that would sit right there at the front of it. I believe this is another view of that craft, easily, I would think, mistakable for a UFO by the untrained observers, people who
The
don't
only
know
thing I'd
about it.
play as devil's advocate to is what is it using for propulsion? They would match the speed of like objects going really fast,
Right.
And so, but the hum, like that's got to be a jet, and a jet doesn't really sound like a
That
hum.
it sure does look like it has two jet engines on it, doesn't it?
Yes, so
Yeah.
and it won't go as slow as some of the witnesses say the triangles are going.
Right.
Like when there's no a jet will just fall out of the sky.
Right.
It'll stall, and that would be the end of it.
And here's a different patent that was filed for a triangular shaped object. And it talks a little bit here about possible propulsion, inertial mass reduction. To me, I'm not an aerospace or aeronautical engineer, but inertial mass reduction, is that in any way possibly anti-gravitic?
Sounds like it to me.
I mean, I
sounds
don't
like you're
know.
reducing the mass, so it's lighter. But
Right. And this inventor was from right here in Maryland, in Leonardtown, and it was assigned to the U.S. government, represented by the Secretary of the Navy. And that's pretty interesting that the Secretary of the Navy would be involved in this. And this goes back not quite as long. The last one was 2018, December 4th of 2018. So if nothing else, Mike, this tells us that the United States government and companies are working together and or separately to build and fly craft that are triangular or delta in shape, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It kind of very clearly shows, yeah, the government's involved with this. Now, does that mean all black triangles are being made by the U.S. government? Probably not, but I would argue that some number of them are. People are seeing military craft being being tested, or civilian craft.
I agree.
Now, people are also seeing triangles that may be explained by things like NOS, the National Ocean Surveillance System. And I'm going to show you a picture in a little bit. These satellites fly in clusters of 3. And when they pass overhead, you see 3 lights that look like a triangle because of how the formation in which that they are flying.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it has different colors that can trip people up as well.
Right.
Here, the next slide, you'll see what they look like. But you got to look real close. On the right-hand side,
Yep, I see
you
it.
can see, oh man, that's a triangle, right? Well,
Right.
yeah, but it's 3 different objects. It's not, and they're Navy satellites. It's not a UFO or a black triangle.
Now,
Put here to illustrate how people can be fooled by things in the night sky or day sky even.
now, are these on the various satellite tracking websites? Like if a case
Yes.
came in, yeah, okay.
Yes. And I skipped back. This is for a patent for a delta-winged hybrid airship created, filed by Boeing. Of course, they're a big government contractor.
Yep.
Dated August of 2006. And there's basically what it looked like.
And it looks like it has propellers. So again, there's the
Yes.
hum.
Yes, it does. Yeah, okay. There's some data that goes to that diagram we just had up.
Mhm.
Look at the wingspan on that. 630 feet.
Fits around what the Bigelow group said, about 600 feet.
Yeah, it sure does.
And still doesn't meet the 6,000 feet of the Phoenix Lights site.
No, it does not. But it's still big.
It is.
And look at the low speed of that thing. 95 knots.
Yep.
So it can carry a 1.25 ton of people and material.
And it's got a very high cruise altitude. So if you
Oh,
see
it
something,
does. Yeah.
if you see it ascending, it would look like a triangle. You see the underbelly and it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I have to ask.
Yeah.
You mentioned the cruise altitude of this proposed craft. Why 85,000 feet? Why would we need a cargo carrying airship at 85,000 feet?
I think it's the same reason why we wanted our spy craft at that high, because there's not a lot of, there's not a lot of weight. I mean, it goes 95 knots slow. It's cumbersome. It probably is not very maneuverable with that much cargo, and it's probably a lot safer. There's not a lot of aircraft that can go that high. You can fire missiles and rockets, but
the only thing I can think of, the SR-71 is the only thing that would have been cruising at that type of altitude.
Right.
Or maybe that the X-47, we have that looks like a mini space shuttle that can stay in orbit for a year.
Oh, longer. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's also more fuel efficient the higher you go. That's why commercial aircraft fly so high. So if you have something 85,000 feet, it's probably, I think it's a combination of safety and efficiency to have it go that high. But I don't know how practical it is today against peer rivals. I'm pretty sure some of our more peer armies and navies out there that are from other countries that are similar in technology could probably
Right.
shoot it down. So the
Well, at
question
some
is,
point, Mike, yeah, okay, at 85,000 feet, maybe it's efficient for flight, maybe. Nothing can shoot it down, I guess. I don't
well,
know.
nothing, but it makes it more difficult to
Right.
shoot it down.
But at some point, this craft has to land.
Right.
And it's not going to be moving very quickly when it comes down. So as
Right.
soon as it gets down to 60,000 feet, say, it's a sitting duck.
Unless it's over friendly territory.
Well, yeah, then it doesn't matter.
Right.
But if they're trying to move cargo over, say, over Ukraine right now, right?
Yeah. Right.
To move cargo over there, that's going to be shot down pretty quickly once it comes down in altitude.
Yeah.
I would think.
No, it's very true. And it could be something where they have fighter jets escorting it a lot like they do VIP craft. You know, I don't know. But
interesting numbers though, the very slow cruising speed and the altitude, the cruise altitude. That didn't say maximum altitude either. That's what it's cruising at.
Correct. So it could, theory, go a little higher.
Yeah. And here's an example of what it might be used for. Communication relay. That's interesting because I don't know why we wouldn't just use satellites, but that's what this proposed design is about.
Well, a lot of aircraft now are starting to become relays for other aircraft. If you watch them on TV, and they do it for a variety of reasons.
Right.
More mobile, I think, is the most common one.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
So these are some questions that I pose, rhetorically almost. If the objects are man-made, it may make, and jet-powered, it may make sense for them to be triangular, because delta-shaped wings are what I've read are very strong and very, they're good for weight and speed and all of that. Aerodynamically, they're very good. So does that kind of tell us that, yeah, these are probably conventionally powered?
I think
so. Is there
so.
some other reason that we would go with a triangular shape?
I mean, I don't know. Has there ever been a study done on like what the most common shape is that humans gravitate towards? Are we more of rectangle would be something, circles? I know like a lot of times you say as people draw a shape and they draw a circle. So maybe it's a psychological thing. Maybe if it was an extraterrestrial craft, a civilization, they gravitate towards a triangle. Right. I mean, that's stupid. That's really nothing out there to, but I think that what you're laying out here makes more sense for these are man-made objects. I think the craft that are more extraterrestrial in nature are the more oddball shaped craft. That's like a saucer shaped or the cylindrical objects that people see in the sky because
like the Tic Tac.
Like the Tic Tac.
My God, that's about as far from aerodynamically,
right,
that you can get.
And also remember, like a lot of these craft, we have to remember what our capability is at the time. Like the Tic Tac moved in directions and pulled G's and accelerated and decelerated in ways that, unless it's buried somewhere in the classified world, our commercial aviation can't do right now.
Right.
A cylindrical craft that's slow and cumbersome, like you see in some witness reports, would fall out of the sky. Our planes still need wings and a jet engine. So
right. They need speed, they need wings, they need lift.
Yeah.
All of that.
So a triangle does seem to lean more, like you were saying, to man-made for some form or another.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like, I just asked the question. I'm not an aerospace engineer, or and nothing like that.
Right.
It just seems to me that as it points out here, the value of the triangular shape or delta shape makes sense for the technology that we have right now.
Yes.
And if these things were of extraterrestrial origin and using some type of anti-gravitic propulsion, they could be any shape. They could be that cylinder. They could be that tic tac. They could be a cube or an orb. It could be anything.
Right.
Unless
Absolutely.
there's something that I'm missing about the value of a triangular shaped spacecraft. I just don't know.
Well, maybe that's where one of our audience members will come in
I hope
and,
so.
and educate us on that. Because I am with you. I am not a aeronautical engineer. I can't speak for that, but like your slide here, form follow functions, and our form has specific functions for our current level of technology.
Absolutely does. We design our airliners the way we do because that's the technology we have.
Mm-hmm.
We have jet engines pushing the craft forward. And yeah, there's the tic tac. There's the top shaped one,
Mm-hmm.
the cube and the sphere. They don't need to be. They're not triangles, yet they appear to be moving quite well through our skies.
Correct. And I think that alone shows that there's something unique about them. They truly are an unknown aerial phenomenon.
So there you have it. I don't know that we've been able to prove or disprove anything here about the triangle phenomenon, except perhaps that a good portion of what people are seeing are probably man-made. I don't think we can rule out a back-engineered craft of some type, maybe. We're in an intermediate phase of building one of our own. We're not quite there yet with the propulsion, but given what we've found, I think we could probably make the case, Mike, that maybe not the preponderance of them are man-made, but a good chunk of them are.
I agree. I think that it's the fact that they are out there. I think that what we have shown that at least from the 1930s on, there's a very high probability that they're man-made of some form or another. What level and who created it, whether it was the US government taking German technology and advancing it, or homegrown in the US or in some other country, I think there's a high probability of that. Some of the flight characteristics of the speeds that witnesses say these craft move on maybe will lend to the fact that, okay, this could be an unknown. However, I would put a caveat or a little asterisk to that. As we said, most of these cases, all of these cases that we know, let me rephrase, are at night.
Yeah.
And without a frame of reference, it is very hard to determine speed, altitude, and height, speed, altitude, and direction. I mean, direction is relatively easy now because everyone has a compass on their smartphones. But a couple of years ago in the 80s, before you had a compass, unless you had, you knew that building faced north, you were kind of SOL. And how it was late at night, the sun wasn't going down. So I think that some of the witnesses' descriptions of speed, altitude, and direction, maybe just they don't have a reference to gauge it.
Right.
It's
very hard to be accurate with that when you're looking at it.
I think that if we really wanted to tear into this, the only way we're ever going to truly prove extraterrestrials is to look in the past. And those ones that you put at the beginning of the slideshow with
Right.
the references in the 1800s and then the 1530 with the painting.
Right.
Yeah, technology didn't even exist. There wasn't even planes back then. So that's really the only way we're ever going to prove triangles are real, if we can go back and find evidence of triangles in the past.
Yep. Okay. Well, folks, that wraps up our episode for tonight. We are very eager to get your feedback. We welcome your thoughts on this topic. Please shoot us an email and hit that subscribe button at the bottom if you want to. We look forward to it.
And
Mike, what's our next podcast going to be about?
Well, our next podcast is going to be on unidentified submerged objects. And we talked a little bit about that tonight with where to hide some of these craft. And next podcast, we're going to really dive into this and look at some examples and maybe why they're there, why they picked the ocean, what the purpose is. I think this is a great subject. I think that this is an under-investigated subject. Maybe you would agree. It seems everyone looks at the sky, but they don't really necessarily look that much at the ocean. And we'll look at maybe what the Navy has found or researched, because there's a lot of great Navy cases, especially up in Canada, of underwater submerged objects. And if this doesn't excite you over visitations by unknown craft, then I don't know what will.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this.
But we do want to thank you for joining us tonight and listening for the full podcast. We do appreciate your feedback. As Dan said, email us. Our email is on our YouTube page, and hit that subscribe button. It helps us a lot to have subscribers and the content reviewed by you. So there is a comment box. So please fill in what your thoughts are. And if you have any questions or concerns about experiences that you had, email us, and we can try and answer that for you. If you have suggestions on what you would like a topic to be for one of our future podcasts, add that to the email. We would love to write and create podcasts that interest you, not just would interest us. So we would very much welcome that. So with that, I'm going to say good night. Dan, I don't know if you have any final thoughts before we end it this evening.
No, I think you summed it up beautifully, Mike. See you guys next time. We look forward to it. Mike, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure too, Dan. I'm looking forward to our next podcast together.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Good night, everyone.